with all due respect, I think this is a terrible idea, and I've long written this for years, and it's a terrible idea for a lot of reasons. But let me start off with just like some, a lot of these things depend on how you look at it. We already have one of the smallest legislatures in the country, judged by the only rational way to look at a legislature. You can't just look at the number of legislators a state has. Some states have no people. Idaho has no people. I mean, literally, no one lives in Idaho. So you would expect them not to have a very large legislature. The only rational way to look at how big a legislature is how many people it represents. Now, the average state representative nationwide represents about 48,000 people. We represent 62,000 people. The average Senate nationwide represents about 170,000 people. We represent about 240,000 people. We are the sixth smallest Senate, given the in terms of proportion to the people we represent in the nation. We're one of the very smallest in the nation. And so when you look at that, it becomes a little less clear why we need to shrink further. And what do we lose by shrinking further? We lose a lot of things. First of all, obviously, we lose contact with our constituents. Think about how often you see your state representative versus how often you see your congressman. This is a tautology. It's simply mathematics. The larger and more spread out your district and the more people in it, the less actual contact you have on average with each of your constituents. It also concentrates more power in fewer hands, which I would think in these times is not something we would be looking to do. And I would just say, all of these things about, well, the benefits of that are it's efficient. There's no evidence. There's no empirical evidence of that. The Senate is a quarter of the size. We're not more efficient historically than the House. And in other states, the efficiency of the state is not in any way correlated to the size of its legislature. So we don't gain anything, at least provably, in terms of efficiency. The reason we don't have a budget now is not because we're inefficient. It's not because we have too many members. We can't figure out who gets the papers. That's not what's causing it. We don't have a budget because we disagree. Okay? We have a very conservative legislature, a very liberal governor, and we just have different ways of looking at the world, and we can't come to an agreement on that. That has nothing to do with the number of legislators we have. And I think if we look for these sort of panaceas that are going to solve all our problems and make all our disagreements go away, if only we had 5 fewer senators, gosh, this would all be resolved by now. That's just not true. It doesn't make any sense. Obviously, rural districts, which are already in the Senate, 2 or 3 hours from one end of the district to the other would be even bigger, harder to get around. And one of the biggest problems I have, because one of my big issues is gerrymandering, the bigger the district, the easier it is to gerrymander. The easier it is, and we have among the most gerrymandered legislatures and congressional districts in the country. We're very, very aggressive about gerrymandering. And this just makes it easier. Every year, out of 203 seats, there's about 15 competitive House seats. There's about 4 competitive Senate seats out of 25 every 2 years. And there are probably, someone will get mad at me because they're running and they're going to tell people they can win. But in my view, there are 0 competitive congressional seats. Okay, the bigger the districts, the easier it is to make them non-competitive and to guarantee that one party wins them. We don't want to make gerrymandering, which is, I think, our biggest problem, easier. If we do this, obviously we have to get rid of 52 seats in the House and 5 in the Senate. I assume that would be done at the next redistricting. Imagine how political that's going to be. And, let me just say this about people say, well, the people, I knock on doors, people support this, and I'm sure that's true in some cases. I've actually seen polls on this. Very few people in Pennsylvania, under 10%, know how many people are in the legislature. Now, my guess is if you ask them, should it be smaller, they'd say yes, in the same sense that if you ask people, should the legislature be paid, yes, they'll say yes. And if you say, how much are they paid, they'll say, I don't know, but it should be less. It's not hard to get someone to bash the legislature or the Congress. That's sort of, de rigueur, but it's not something we should embrace. Okay, I mean, most people have no idea there's 203 members of the House, or that we have too many people in the House. They just know there's too many of us. If there was 10 of us, there'd be too many of us. And so I don't think we should use that as a basis for doing it. And the other thing people are, when people say in the abstract they like to see fewer members, I think they're going to be very upset when they have a member, Senator Vogel, Representative Knowles, that they really like, who's suddenly gone, even though no one's voted to get rid of them. They're just gone. They've just been. We would have to eliminate 52 legislators without any input from the voters on who they are. Okay, they're just gone. Suddenly you're represented by someone else you totally different. You didn't vote for. And I think people are actually going to be very, very upset about that. People say that, other states have different sizes and business goes on. Other states have larger legislatures representing fewer people and business goes on. I don't even know what business goes on really means. I mean, nothing, the earth doesn't swallow up New Hampshire because they have 400 House members. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. I don't live in New Hampshire, but there's no empirical evidence, again, that the size of the legislature is tied to somehow business being better or worse in any given state. In terms of saving money, I don't think it would save $9 million. Even if it did save $9 million, that's way, way less than 1/10 of 1% of our budget. I mean, this is not going to be something that anyone, that's going to make a difference in terms of our budget deficit or anything like that. But I don't even think, because we obviously, if you're going to serve the constituents as well, you're going to have to have the same number of staff. They would work for fewer legislators, probably the same number of offices. You'd probably just save legislative salaries. And again, it is a tiny, tiny infinitesimal fraction of our budget every year, and shouldn't be driving it when it has so many adverse consequences. Finally, I would just say, specifically on the Senate, again, I don't know how we say we have too big of a Senate. Many other states have Senates either our size or larger, even in raw numbers, let alone number where, again, only 6 states represent more constituents than we do. And so it has a feel like, well, we're doing something to the House, we have to do something to the Senate. We'll go from 50 to 45. That seems like a difference that, other than the adverse consequences I've mentioned, won't even be noticed in terms of how business is done around here. It's like, it has a feel of, well, we got to do something to the Senate since we're doing something to the House. I don't think this is rational lawmaking. And I think if we look at this, I think the important thing is we want to serve our constituents well, and I think that is not tied to doing the sort of reductions we see here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.